morning, everyone. Welcome to the Chocolate Extravaganza. My name is Heather. We're so excited to have you guys here at Orsingigi. I should have checked. How many years? 13? Is there 13? Yeah, 13 years of doing this chocolate festival, which kind of fell in our laps one day when there used to be the Utah Chocolate Show. And about a month before they usually held it, they were like, so we're not going to be doing it this year? And they handed it over to us, and we were like, so we don't put on shows, we just do classes. And it was such a fun thing for us to be able to do because we love to learn how to do things with chocolate. We love to be in the kitchen, and we have found our people that also love to do that as well. There's lots of familiar faces, but if this is your first time here joining us, welcome. It's addicting here. There's lots of fun things that we do, and we do that with the beauty and the grace by our amazing instructors. And today we are so honored to have Josh from Guittard joining us. He comes to us from Chicago, and I kind of sprung on him this morning. A group from Granite School District just pulled up on a bus of 30 seniors, and they said, we just happened to be coming by. Our other field trip canceled on us. We thought we'd stop by, and I was like, really? And Josh so graciously opened the kitchen up to them and answered their questions, and it was so fun to not only hear kind of a little bit of his journey about starting in the kitchen at 14 years old, but also just life lessons that I think as we get older, we get to be able to share with those that have not been able to experience the things that we have. And so I hope that a lot of them are now maybe looking into a world of pastry and into the kitchen. And he was honest. He said there's some really hard times, but it's also very beneficial. And Guittard has been so gracious to send Josh and Vicki to help just support this weekend with us, and so we are just so great to have him. One of the things that when I reached out to Josh talking about classes, where he was like, please can we do the pumpkin marshmallow? And I was like, yes. I mean, I will never turn down anything like that. But one of the ways that we've been able to get to know Josh is last year when everyone was making cocoa bombs. And a lot of people were struggling with their molds and trying to get this. And so I contacted Vicki from Guittard, and she's like, well, let me talk with Josh. And then like a few hours later, I get pictures of all these different molds at different temps and all this. And she's like, okay, Josh is testing it. We're going to figure out what's going on. And I just was like, oh, I love Josh. Because that is how my mind works. I love to see like the science. I want to understand how the different temperatures are really affecting the things that we do. And so we're going to put a little bit in that today's class, but of course making marshmallow. But
absolutely.
We're just excited to have you guys here. I know you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from Josh today. So you can tell them a little about yourself along the way too.
Okay,
but thank you for coming, and thank you, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. So the demo today is going to be pumpkin marshmallows. Sorry if I'm stuttering here and there. It's like, I landed yesterday. We got some good prep done yesterday, and I always do this right before a demo where we're doing several today. So it's one of those things where you're stumbling walking forward. So there's all kinds of stuff. It's going to slow down in a second. We're doing the pumpkin marshmallow, and at first we talked about, when I was talking with Heather, we talked about, I was going to cast them in bars, and I'll tell you different ways you can do them. Cut them and then just hand dip them or something. And then she brought up the idea of molding, of putting them in a molded shell. So that's what we did. She also asked me about these silicone molds. So I grabbed one off the shelf, and I've never used one of these. So I didn't even practice it, kind of intentionally. I want to do it today and see what happens. So we'll cast chocolate in this one, we'll fill it. We'll try to force it and unmold it. We'll see how it goes. But marshmallow needs a little bit of time to fully set. So we're going to play it by ear. So I'm going to do this a little bit backwards. I'm going to do the marshmallow second and some chocolate work first. How comfortable are we with chocolate tempering? Mixed bag. Who's scared to death of, okay, that tells me that's the thumbs down is definitely a sign. So I'm going to temper some chocolate. And how many of you do compound coatings when you do molded? Okay, just curious. So we'll temper some chocolate. I'll go over the basics. I'm going to try to watch my time to get everything in nice and there's a 15-minute window at the end. So I think if I go over a little bit, I'm okay because I'm the next demo person. So I can pay the consequences. So I have some chocolate melted here. I had it in a warmer overnight, so I know it's melted nicely. But it's been sitting here for a minute. I'm going to give it just a little bit of heat. I don't recommend this as a normal practice, but it's a lot worse to do that in a culinary school. When I did that once, I went to some school in the south side of Chicago. just to work with them for a day. And the chocolate was kind of cool. I put it on the stove, and then I looked at the instructor's face, and she was not happy about that because they'll see what they see me. They'll do what they see me doing. So stir this up, and temperatures. Does anybody know what I melt my chocolate to in order to start the tempering process? All right.
Is it dark or,
Yes, thank you. Dark chocolate.
is it 87 is working, right?
87 is working temp in that ballpark.
So you go to 107?
I go to 120.
Okay.
Okay, here's I'll add on to that. What I'm using here, I'm at 40. I'm gonna go back and forth between Celsius and Fahrenheit, but I'll hit your Fahrenheit numbers. So I'm using a couverture. So couverture, in case you don't know the definition exactly, couverture is a high cocoa butter chocolate, and by definition, it has to be a minimum of 31% cocoa butter. And that doesn't mean when you read the side of the package you see the percentage, right? We've all seen 31% chocolate, 38%, 60, and so on. That means cocoa solids total. Within that cocoa solids is the cocoa butter. So when I say couverture, I mean a chocolate that has at least 31% of cocoa butter on its own. So it's a pretty fluid chocolate. It doesn't even leave a ribbon. If you can, I don't know if you can see that. It doesn't even leave a ribbon in the bowl. There's nothing there. So it's very fluid. The reason I like this, I like it for doing molded shells for a nice thin shell. Keep in mind, the more cocoa butter that's in it, the more of a snap you'll get. I have some chocolate. It hasn't been sitting long enough, but that's what that snap is all about. Cocoa butter is hard as a rock, and so if you crystallize it properly, it's going to set really strong. So I'm at 41 degrees. I'm a little cool, but it melted all night long, so I know all my fats are melted. This is key. Don't melt it over a bain-marie and then look at this liquid chocolate and be like, oh, it's melted. It's 120 degrees. You might have hit a spot that's 120, but if you've ever melted cocoa butter on its own, you'll notice how long it takes for that cocoa butter to melt. There's always one little white speck that hasn't fully melted, but you can take a temp of that liquid and it'll be 120 degrees easily. It'll be 130 more. But there's a couple specks that just haven't melted yet. But here you are, like, oh, it's hot, and then you quick dump so I'm doing seeding method, you quick dump your seeds in, but those little pieces never got a chance to fully melt. Those are gonna interrupt your whole process later on. You start off on the wrong foot. So it's a dream if you're able to have a chocolate warming machine. I have one in the back. It's a little Italian one, might be Martelato, forget the name, but Waring makes one. There's several on the market right now, and the capacities are relatively low, so it's not a crazy large size. And if it sets all night long, melts nice and slow, dial it to 115 maybe. Don't go too hot right away, and it'll just melt it nice and easy. But if you don't have that, it's okay. Melt it over the stove, however you like, microwave, but bring it up to 120. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So
No.
about
Ask
that,
away.
So the warmer is not the same as the tempering machine.
That is
So you just
correct.
stick it in the warmer to warm overnight, make sure all the cocoa solids are melted, and then start the tempering the next day.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Do you mind you can unplug it if you bring that warmer. And yes, thank you. It's a warmer, not a tempering machine. I forget the name of that. There's a light something. There's a tabletop tempering. Not a huge fan, but the key is full melt. And if you are doing it without the warmer, melt it on the stove, melt it in the microwave, get it to 120 or so, but just let it hang out over here. Let the heat soak in. Go back and check it, give it a little more boost of heat, and get it fully melted. So this is a simple little one. Martelato, yes. This is an Italian one. The capacity, it looks like, I don't know, 5 kilos, 10 pounds or so. But just for reference. And this is a European one, so it has a funky plug on it. But I'll let that hang out, and even if, after the demo, if you want to come poke at it, you're welcome to. So, fully melted chocolate. Next step. Does anyone like to table? Does anyone like to spread it on the table and scrape it back and forth and do that process? No? Okay, we're good. I mean, I'll talk through that one quick. So now the goal is to crystallize it, temper it. So we take brand new chocolate that's never been melted, that is in temper. It comes out of the factory that way, forever and ever and ever, unless there's a problem at the factory. So when I And of course, just in case, ooh, I was supposed to do this for you. 1 second. We're gonna do a quick, like, if this was gonna be video editing, this would be edited in later. But so, fast forward to our molded candies. Fully molded. Sorry for the interruption. But they're gonna pop them out in the bag and get them set up, unless you don't want to eat them. That's okay. Okay, so yeah. So these were molded several days ago. They should pop out relatively easy. I'm gonna do it on a tray so I can move the whole tray. You're right here. Table's better because it's more flat. You're right here up on top in one motion. Drop it, and you get some that come out. Scoot them to the side. I didn't color these, I went with just basic. These are just tasters. Whatever doesn't pop out, just tap it over and over. And again, table's better because it doesn't do that. That shock does a lot. Like, it takes energy out, so it doesn't let them pop out. That's our quick on molding. We'll talk about more of that later. I promised her and I ignored her. And I gave them a chill right before. We'll talk about that as well. Okay, so anyways, chocolate that's fully crystallized. We're gonna do the seeding method, which means we're adding seeds to our chocolate. And those seeds, can anyone tell me what those seeds are? Anytime I ask a question, I don't like being in the audience getting the question asked, but I honestly do it just to like stir up a conversation. I like to know what people know. I don't ever want to make you feel weird if you don't know it. Just heads up. Does anyone know what I mean when I say seeds? What's your thoughts?
Well, it's the cocoa butter that hasn't been melted, and so then they can hold on to that like a crystalline structure.
Yes.
And then form the crystalline structure that's a stable.
Yes. So that chocolate that I never melted, oh, I left it right there. That chocolate has the correct crystal structure in it. And that correct crystal structure happens to be one crystal. I think it's, and I should know this because I work in chocolate. My brain goes away often with terminology. I think it's beta 5 is a crystal. It doesn't matter, it's the good one. And when we go through the process, I'll explain how that happens. But this is full of one kind of crystal, the stable crystal, the one that makes it do that, the one that makes it possible to release it from a mold so it contracts when it sets. So that has one crystal in it, and it's the good one. And so when I add unmelted chocolate to this, when I seed this, it's literally like imagine a Parmesan can of cheese, and you're dumping all these little crystals in there that are gonna go in there and start multiplying. They're gonna start melting at first, but here's where temperature comes in as reference. They're gonna start melting, but there's gonna be a point when they stop melting and they start gathering and multiplying. And we temper by temperature. We go 120 degrees. When we seed, we go down to 89 or 87, something like that. Those numbers aren't hard numbers. They can't be because every chocolate's a little bit different. When we hit that point, that at 80, let's call it 87 degrees, let's say 88, just in the middle of yours and mine. When we hit that number, that crystal isn't melting anymore. It's stable, but not only that, it starts multiplying like crazy. And I don't know the term, this is too sciencey for me, but there's a term, I forget what it is, for this type of crystal. And what it is when that crystal starts to ignite, is the only word I can think of. When it starts to happen, when it starts to multiply, that crystal turns all other crystals into its own shape. So they all flip. So if you imagine crystals as shapes, they're not like what I'm about to describe, but if you imagine them as circles and triangles and squares, all different mixed up shapes, they don't fit together. They won't make a nice sturdy, imagine building a wall of triangles and circles and squares. It doesn't work. It's going to be weak. So if one of those crystals happens to have a shape that's, let's just say, square, if they all turn to that shape, you're going to build this brick wall, this perfectly strong wall or crystal structure that's just like locked together. It's all the same crystal. And that's what we've done when we went really high to melt them all. You have to melt them all in order to make any of them. You can't just melt it a little. In theory, you can melt it a little bit. Get to that. Melt all of them and start from scratch. Liquid fat. Add seeds. Temperature starts to go down. Okay, these seeds stop melting, and now they reach a point where they're grabbing onto every other crystal and turning it into itself. And then you have a building block that you can work off of. Does that make sense, kind of, sort of? Okay.
Sorry, can I pick your brain about temperature?
Yeah.
So how do you recommend measuring temperature? Because I've heard that the gun is great, but that doesn't get the temperature down in.
Yes.
Do you like the spatula measuring, or how do you prefer to measure temperature?
I've not used the spatula one, but I love the idea of the spatula one because it's submerged.
Right.
My only question with that is longevity. I just don't know them, so I have no experience, but I love that it's submerged fully. This, you're 100% right. You can stand here and mix it, and you get a better idea-ish, but as long as you know your thermometer. I know how off this one is, and I know what it means when it says this or that, so I'm good with that. But if you're traveling and if you don't have a go-to, the one that you submerge is probably always going to be the best, because it's going to be very accurate with what's on the inside. Yeah.
And then one other question. Sorry.
Yeah. No.
I'm just so excited to pick your brain. Okay. The other thing is, how do you keep it at working temperature? Because I struggle with keeping it at working temperature. I've noticed that you've been doing the stove trick, which is cool.
Yeah.
Could you, once it's tempered, can you put it back in the warmer? And would that keep it in temper?
Yeah. That, yes. Once it's tempered, so 89 degrees, 88 degrees. What is that? 88 degrees. So I hit my number. I'm super happy with this temper. It looks great. Yes. Put it back in there, but your lid is off. So if we're talking 88 degrees is your happy number, dial it up to maybe 91 because you have airflow. And but have a heat gun. Still have a heat gun handy. Most important thing when you're maintaining it is don't be crazy about stirring it, because the top cools little by little. Every piece you dip in there, if you're dipping or if you're hand dipping, whatever you do, everything you put in there cools the temperature. Micro numbers, so small, times 10 times 100 and more. It cools and cools, right? So, and you have wind blowing across it that you don't even feel. So if you start to develop a crust anywhere around it, the crust being extra crystallized chocolate, and you like, oh, the edges are sticking, let me scrape that in there. Gonna scrape the sides really good. What did I just do when I scraped the sides really good of the pasty chocolate? Any thoughts? What was that? I heard an over. What's that? I lowered the temp. Not necessarily. Didn't lower the temp, but it looks like I lowered the temp because that stuff that I stirred in was hard, like really hardy, pasty, crystallized, over crystallized chocolate. It's full of crystals. And now if I stir those in, I've compounded the crystallizing effect. I've added 1 million more crystals than I need at this point. And keep in mind, temperature won't always reflect viscosity. I could have a chocolate that is not well maintained, that's thick as mud. And you're frustrated because you're like, but this says 88 degrees, but it's so thick. And even though it's a chocolate that's not thick, that's okay. That's science working against you. You've possibly scraped too much, or if you don't have a cushion, this is getting crystallized, and you keep scraping the bottom, and you're compounding and compounding that in there. And so keep that in mind. That every little bit I scrape in there adds to that, compounds it. So this is great because it keeps heat all on the bottom. Every now and then give it a stir, but before you stir, check the top. If it looks like it's crystallizing a little bit, take a heat gun and just kill the top crystals a little bit, and then stir it in. If you've gone up in temp a little bit, that's okay. Let it cool back down. There's a window. In Celsius, I go 31 Celsius. And if I go over 35, game over for me. If I get to 34 degrees, I'm a little too warm, it's gonna be streaky. Pull it out of the melter, let it sit here for a second, give it a stir, let it calm back down. Because the higher you go, you start killing too many of those crystals and you're getting weaker and weaker. But just before you go too far, fall off the cliff, pull it out, let it calm down. It's gonna come back down, the crystals are gonna keep developing if you maintain that temp, and you'll be okay. It'll come back to the right finish. So you'll be fine. Otherwise, warmer, this is a lot of work. If you don't have that and you don't trust that, have a pot of a warm chocolate over here somewhere. Warm being, I don't know, 100, fully melted, and it may have cooled down a little bit, not tempered, but just 100 degrees, let's call it. Come over here, ladle in. You'll have to figure out how much that is. Ladle, 1 ladle in, maybe 2 ladles, give it a stir, check your temp. That hot chocolate is keeping this under control as well. You can add hot chocolate to this all day long, as long as you watch your numbers. Don't go too high. And you went a little high, it's okay. Let it calm down, and you'll be good. And if you're ever unsure, always go back to the paper test. Just don't use a curled paper. That's me from earlier. Does anyone do this test? So this is the best test ever. I don't know if you can see it good. Drop it on top, drag it across. I don't need a lot dripping. Okay, that's too much. Drag it across. Ideally, it shouldn't be curved and it would sit flat. That's one of my sloppier ones. We'll just see what it does.
So is that parchment paper or wax paper?
That's parchment paper. Because the temperature is going to tell you temperature. That's all it tells you. If you, I have this question a lot. Oh, but it's 31 degrees or 88 degrees. If I get a phone call and I walk away from my hot chocolate and I come back and I totally forgot what I was doing, oh, the temp is 88 degrees, I'm good to go. No, you're not. It's just, that's untempered chocolate that cooled down to 88 degrees. Nothing has happened in there. So you have to be wary of your thermometer. Thermometer tells you a number. It doesn't tell you crystallized or not. It's just a number. So, and also my favorite trick I may or may not do is if I have a couple pieces and I'm at a good number, this looks like a good number and it's doing exactly what I want. It's not the best ever, but this works. And it's gonna build more crystals, it's gonna be stable. You should start setting from one point and move in one direction. If it starts setting here, a little streak here setting, streak here, that's not what you want. You want it to move in a gradual direction. That would mean that it's moving from the thinnest direction to the thickest, the thinnest spot to the thickest. That's setting. Granted, this is pretty cold. It's not refrigerator cold. A lot of purists will put it instead on a scraper because that's neutral-ish. It's not a cold stone, but I'm good with that. But if I had a couple chunks, which I have a couple, I'm gonna try to avoid them when I do my mold. Oh, I forgot my mold. Can you, one favor, right through this wall there's 2 gray tubs. It's not a major crazy rush, but in one of those I have a white polycarbonate mold of a dome. If you wouldn't mind grabbing that, please. No one will tell you this trick, maybe you know it. If it's too chunky and you just don't want to do this dance back and forth of heating it, does anyone use their immersion blender for chocolate? Yes, no? I knew that was maybe a dirty word. You do? It's the best thing ever. It is the best thing ever. And you gotta know your immersion blender, because you all know it can make bubbles, right? When you get it in there, if it's kind of tilted wrong, give it a couple taps and you'll know when that bubble is out. And you hear the hum, it has the perfect hum. Because this is the thing, when a couple competitions I did, I have 2 melters, big ones, 4 times that size. That's all the chocolate I get for 10 hours today to build my showpiece. To cast all my components for tomorrow's build. I'm tempering that by hand. I don't have time for like this, a little heat gun for the tiny specks of chocolate. No, I took an industrial hand blender with me and I tempered it, and believe me, I practiced this a million times. This thing only holds 4,500 grams of chocolate, and that's it, no more, no less. My dial only sits here at 50 Celsius, no more, no less. I don't seed it until it hits this exact temp. So I might take the heat gun and get it a half a degree warmer. And then I have my Ziploc bag of crushed chocolate, not ground, but just broken up. Dump it in, whatever percentage, a long time ago. And if it wasn't perfect, I take that thing, it's like a motorboat. I mean, I'd buzz that whole mix and it will obliterate any tiny little, I don't know if you can see in the camera, I have one lump right there. It'll obliterate that. The reason you don't want that, and here we're gonna do it quick and get rid of it. The reason you don't want that for long term is that's, as it sits there, it's spitting out more crystals and spitting them out and spitting them out. Why is my chocolate getting so thick? Well, I don't know, because you have 8 giant lumps in there, you know? Instead, pulverize those. And it will distribute them all out. Not only that, it does generate heat, so be careful. It's very mesmerizing, so don't just get stuck there blending away. Because you're like, why is it 4 degrees too hot now? Well, that's because you were there for 10 minutes blending it, you know? And so, thank you. So watch out, but that's a game changer. You don't have time for waiting on that stuff. Yes?
And a heat question, you talked about 35 and you've blown it and gone too far.
Yeah.
So if you overheat your chocolate,
Mhm.
can you just heat it all back up and let it go? I mean, is it a loss? You don't pitch it? Or
No. It's not a loss. Overheat it too much.
You just start over?
Start over.
Okay.
Heat it back up to point, the beginning point, 120.
Okay.
The higher the cocoa butter content, I'm not supposed to tell you this, because this is horrible practice, but chocolate costs money, as you all know. I've worked with this exact chocolate, even before I worked for the company. This is on the shelf, by the way. Soleil, I can't say, what's the Lèvre du Soleil? I should know these names, I work for them. They're too Frenchy sometimes, I start saying the percentages. So, I worked with this for years and years, the competition thing. And I'd be melting it, big thing melting on the steam, because I just need to get it melted quick. And I go back and check it, I forgot about it. And I've melted this to like 150, 160 degrees Fahrenheit. No big deal, they can take it. I don't recommend that regularly. But if it doesn't have a singed taste, if fire didn't reach it, you're fine. You're totally fine. It can take some abuse. Okay, so I'm gonna go, because of timing, I'm gonna go, even though there's a couple lumps in here, I'm gonna go for it. If it's something you want to see. You wanna see a molded shell? I like paper. Get these out of your way just in case. I like paper for my mess. I don't like to put my scrapings into my tempered holding box, whatever I'm trying to say, because it's gonna over crystallize everything. And so I don't like that. I'd rather make a mess on the table. Scraper. I'm gonna kind of fish through to get the spoon is fine. More efficient. Put it in a little deli and pour. That's even better for you. Well, let's do this. Get rid of this. I should have got a deli. This is too slow. I get really antsy. Any questions so far on anything? Did I make any confusing statements? Anything like that? Question?
How much seed did you put in? Like, what's the rule on that?
About a third is kind of sort of the rule. And my advice to you is practice with the same thing all the time. And what I just said, like, that was a competition, but just because it's not a competition doesn't mean you can't find the warming device that works for you, whatever that means. You can't find the super happy number that works for that melting temp. And if you did the same thing all the time, always measuring, again, I don't want to scrape it into the, if you did the same amount of seed every time for the same melting temp, that's perfect. You can't beat that. Because it took me a while, I'm gonna dump it right away. Tilt it this way, tap, this way. Now it's just what thickness do you want?
If you don't reuse that or remount that, you just eat it.
Yeah, that's what's for dinner. No, my favorite thing to do is after I'm done with everything, the best way forever to store, if you don't have the whole warming setup, that thing that sits overnight, which I don't plug that in. I do a lot of work out of my house, so I don't plug that in at home. My kitchen space is valuable. My counter space. I don't want that Italian thing hanging out on my kitchen counter. So and there we have it. Nice thickness. There we go. I like them sideways. Some people put them upside down. I don't like the possibility of too much dripping down. And I don't like an extra thick, heavy foot on the bottom. I like them kind of a little bit thinner. Now let's see what happens with this. So my favorite, if I'm done with my chocolate, all done, I dump it all out flat and let it crystallize fully. And then when it's fully crystallized, I break it up and put it into Ziploc bags. And then you're ready for the next project. Whether that means chocolate mousse, brownies, remelting it. And the thing is, you've stored it as tempered. As ugly as this is, it's tempered. Which means that's shelf life. I'm not saying that untempered chocolate spoils quickly, but it has more ability to gather to take on other aroma smells, and it can go rancid. This takes some time. It's not like in 1 week it's rancid, but the more those fats are all together nicely, the longer it'll last as a good quality chocolate.
But even though that's tempered, you can't use that as seed chocolate.
Oh, you 1000% can.
So that
How much do you trust your tempering? And this is the question. But if you temper normally, it's fine. I would bust this up and use it as seed. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. These are good questions, by the way.
Seeding.
Yeah. No.
Seeding is also, isn't that the same, like it'll sometimes be referred to as like the ice cube method? Or is that totally different?
The ice cube, when you put the bowl over the ice?
No, like when you, like I've seen like YouTube videos or whatever where they seed, but the seeding is referred to like using it as an ice cube, but
Oh,
it's not an ice cube.
it's a chunk of
literally.
chocolate. Yeah, that's old school. That's how they used to do it before there were chocolate wafers and coins and all that stuff. Because for a long time, the only thing available was 10-pound blocks. Ugh. Like, when I was a kid in the kitchen, that was my job, me and my brother, to chop up 10-pound blocks. That is miserable. Miserable. I still have a callus on my hand that it's not like on the surface, but as soon as I start cutting anything with that action, it's still there from when I was 13 years old. So the idea is, yes, this is a hot bowl of hot chocolate. I take a big old chunk of that block, drop it in there and stir it until I hit my temp. It's perfect. It's a little messy, but it's perfect. And if that's what you have to work with, no problem. I would go with it. Okay, we're gonna knock this one out quick. This is the one I've never done before. Fingers crossed. Or if you want to see a mistake, this will be fun for you all to watch. Let's do this. There's just, the challenge with these is they're flexible, right? So I don't know what's gonna happen when I flip it. Let's see. So that's tempering in a nutshell. That's seeding. We go from hot to working temp because we added crystals. If you ever get confused by a tempering curve chart, it goes hot, it goes cold, and then it goes back to warm again. That curve refers to tabling chocolate. It got really hot, pour it on the table, and scrape it. You gotta go extra cold because you need to make the crystals because you don't have any. Like the ones we've added, you don't have any. Okay, this is a little bumpy, but it works. Get rid of that, clean that. I need to give it one more scrape. I don't want to scrape it on the surface like this because initially, but now I see it's kind of going back down. So this one needs a little bit more time upside down. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give it just a minute like this. I'll peel it up and I'm hoping and thinking it'll take some of the excess, so give that a second. In the meantime, yes.
So if you're not doing a lot of chocolate, is there a percentage of the amount of seed that you can exceed?
One more time.
Is there kind of like a percent of, can you put in 25% as seeded, or can you put, is there like some
basic guidelines for
Yeah.
tempering, for seeding.
yeah,
It's
like if you can't put more than half of it can be seed, or you can't, is there?
I would say that's not too bad. We're gonna see how that pops out. We're gonna see how it pops out on its own, just for flexibility. We're gonna knock out the marshmallow quick because I'm taking forever. So, general rule for seeding is gonna be,
Like, I don't want to do a whole big pot. If I just want to do a little bit, I'm doing strawberries or something small.
small is hard,
Okay.
but so I would say general rule. Thank you very much. I can keep that because it's messy. Thank you so much. General rule:
Don't do small.
2/3, 1/3.
Okay.
2/3 melted,
Okay.
1/3 of seeds. Generally, you can change that to 75-25. 75 melted, 25. If it's like in the case of something small, I'd add less because you're also thinking about mass. If you have this much chocolate and you want to temper it, that mass cools down fast.
Right.
Even though you threw that stuff, all that energy just poof goes away. Is that kind of what you're asking?
No, that was it,
Yeah.
that's it.
So, okay, so do this then. Melt your small amount, but be careful because a small amount of tempered doesn't last long either. It wants to crystallize so fast. Melt this much right here, which is not much. Hot, nice and hot. Have your 1/3 of wafers and just add a little bit at a time. And just keep a close eye. Looks like those aren't melting so much anymore. Let me stop adding and just keep stirring. So you're just easing it into it. That's totally fine.
So the bigger pot of melted you can do, the better.
Yeah, yeah. It's got so much energy in it. It's hanging on to that heat. How cold is the room? All of that stuff. Okay, so let me knock this out quick. So marshmallow, I have gelatin, spices. That's gonna go over there. I have sugar and water. Sugar, water, glucose. Trimoline. Trimoline is an invert sugar. It's very sweet. If you don't have access to trimoline or invert sugar, use honey. Same sweetening power, and you'll be totally fine. So I'm gonna put the sugars. Wait a second, actually I'm putting the trimoline. How did I do this? Me a saucepan. I just cooked this 15 times. I do put the trimoline in the bowl.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Right off the bat?
Yeah.
So, anytime I've done marshmallows, it's with egg whites.
Okay.
You have no egg white in here.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that?
This is actually, this style, sorry, my brain just went on me for a second. This style is a very, gelatin's a very common marshmallow thing, super common. The thing about, let me think about this for a second. The thing about, so sugar, water, glucose, and pumpkin. I'll get back to that in just one sec. What I found is I tried to put the pumpkin into the bowl and just pour the hot syrup over it. And I don't understand this science yet. This is a very new recipe. I just kind of started working on it. I don't understand the science yet, but when the marshmallows sit out overnight to set fully, it kind of sweat a little bit. I don't know what that was. When I cook the marshmallow like this, it works great. I mean, the pumpkin for the marshmallow, it works fantastic. I'm letting that sit in there just for a sec. I'm gonna cook this really hot, 155 Celsius. I have to do some math. Is the math done for you in there? For Fahrenheit?
So this one says 110 Celsius, does it mean 110 Fahrenheit?
Where does it say 110?
Or should a saucepan combine those things
Yeah.
until 110 Celsius?
Oh, you know what? Yes, and thank you. I messed up. That's the next demo, 155. That makes it so much faster. So 110, but here's my question. You're all high altitude people. It is 110 Celsius, but I have to drop that number by a couple degrees because I'm up high. Is that correct? We're gonna see what happens. But I'm gonna show you one of the signs that you can look for. I don't do high altitude cooking or baking. I stay at sea level. Does someone have a, I can give you the conversion, do you want? You wanna know how to do the math yourself? 110 times 1.8 plus 32. That's your conversion.
So I live in Seattle, so would I then,
What's that? Is that high, low, normal?
that's sea level?
Sea level?
Yeah.
110.
Okay.
And 110, the signs you're gonna see for 110, and I'm sorry for this, but it's gonna be spitting at you. This is kind of a messy cooking thing here. It's gonna be spitting and spitting at you. It's annoying, but it's the temp that I found works absolutely the best.
What
Go.
do you use for glucose?
Corn syrup. And this recipe had a lot more trimoline in it at first, invert sugar. And just an FYI for you, glucose is a really good whipping agent. So I switched to a lot more glucose in this, and suddenly I had more volume in my marshmallow. It sets with a nicer texture. Super happy with it. When can we hand out? I'll hand these out as soon as she comes back. You want to eat one? Maybe?
Always.
Sorry, vegetarians. Egg white question, egg white and gelatin. The thing I'm not sure about that, this is a battle between bacteria. They both have it. I honestly don't know which one would have a longer shelf life, to be totally honest with you. But I can tell you, the egg whites that I use at home, I don't know if you have this practice, egg whites that I use at home, I leave on my counter forever. There's some sitting out right now. But I'm curious when I get back if they're going to be there, like if they've gone all the way down. If you do marshmallows with egg whites, let them sit out on your counter for 2-3 days.
So like macarons.
Like macarons. Water evaporates. The albumin, which is the strength, the protein, is more, not dense, what's the word about concentrated? You have very strong meringue. Very strong. So I don't have a good answer for you on that. I kind of want to believe that gelatin might be a little bit more controlled with bacteria in the long run. But that's a guess.
Are the textures the same?
Very simple. I don't know that you would tell the difference. Yeah, yeah.
When you say organic sugar, what is that? Wheat sugar?
That is, it's cane sugar, but I'm glad you asked that because rolling boil, I'll take the temperature in a minute, but it is going to start spitting. And you're going to have to stir this one a little bit. You don't normally stir syrups, right? But it starts to get pretty tight. So organic sugar is sugar that has a little bit of molasses left in it. So that's a preference that I picked for this recipe. You don't have to, but the reason I chose it is because it has a little bit more of that molassesy feel for this pumpkin marshmallow. And so it just kind of goes along with the theme. It's not a must, but it's a little plus. Come on, there we go.
So I just want to clarify, when you said you leave your egg whites on the counter, like you leave them on the counter. I've always
Yeah, yeah.
done the refrigerator for a couple days, but you actually leave it on the counter.
I leave it on the counter, and it's fine too, because refrigerators pull moisture, so you're fine with that too. Mine happens to have no lid on it right now at all. It's right now at home, right now. As I say that, there's probably
On
a
the
raccoon
counter.
moved in on the counter. Yeah, 100%. When I worked long ago, I worked at the Ritz in Chicago. Under the counter was a 5-gallon bucket of egg whites. Forever, it lived there forever and ever. And I'm like, what is going on? There was never a smell. If you get egg yolk in there, different story completely. You'll find out in 2 or 3 days if there's egg yolk in your whites.
So if you're ever making meringue, leave them.
Yeah, yeah.
Meringue for something.
Yes, but if you're doing macarons, just be careful because if you go crazy one day and you're like, oh, these have been sitting out for 8 days. These were 3 days. You have different moisture content, so you just have to know your batter. The longer it sits, the more dry it gets, and it will yield a little bit different product. But Italian meringue, buttercream or whatever, all day long, whatever. Just, yeah, don't tell people they're eating the cake though. They won't understand it, and they won't smile about it. Like, you'll be like, oh, it's the best meringue ever. Is it? Stay out for 5 days. Yeah. Yeah. They'll put their forks down. Thanks for the cake. 107. So this says 107 Celsius. I'm supposed to, I feel like, according to the rules, I'm supposed to drop it lower. Ah, that's hot. But get your longer one's good for your fingers. A longer. But I'm looking for the signs, and I don't see a lot of spitting, so I'm okay for a minute. I'm gonna go full 110. That's really hot. Ah, it's 111. I'm gonna go for it. And I'm not like panic stop, like it's fine. Actually, it looks pretty much right. But be very intentional about paying attention to all the little notes. That spit and spatter and stuff is key. All right, so by the way, I'm sorry for running this demo a little bit late. Mix that up just so you know the gelatin's melted. Then we're mixing on high. It's gonna take several minutes. This might go right into like carrying us too late, but the only next thing you have to be careful of, pay attention to, is make sure it's not too hot for your piping into your shells. I don't use these tilt head ones so much. Go 30 degrees or less, 80. Go working temperature of chocolate or less when you're ready to pipe your chocolate. Pipe your marshmallow into your chocolate. because you don't want to damage that shell that you've worked so hard on, right? So that's my advice to you. I mean, you can do whatever you like. I recommend doing it at a cooler temperature. So these things here, I don't see. Those pop out hollow like that. If they're filled, they're gonna have a little more density inside, and I think it'd be even safer. I don't see a problem with those at all. The next step is just fill them and then cap them, of course. Questions on anything? Does this recipe make sense? Yes. Are you talking about making various recipes? The moisture is a thing for sure. Without any moisture, you are going to suffer with volume. I mean, it needs something in there, right? But the tricky part is once you start adding something heavy like peanut butter, then what I would do is peanut butter and Nutella would be super neutral. The thing you got to be careful of is how stabilized will those be once you add it to this much gelatin, right? So I think stability is your biggest question. Stability comes in cooking temperature, and it comes in the amount of gelatin, whether it's meringue or whatever. So I think I would add that later on in the whipping process, especially if it's egg whites, because you don't want all that fat interrupting the initial whipping. But since they're both neutral, I don't think it's going to have a huge effect on the importance of moisture content, honestly at all. But I would add something creamy like Nutella later in the game. But if it's egg whites, you got to be really careful because any of that fat's going to really disrupt the development of egg whites.